Now, more election myths. President Obama's director of opinion research says polls don't matter. I've wondered about that because I've been fooled by polls. In 1980, every pollster missed the Reagan landslide. Is it a myth that polls accurately predict who is likely to win? Let's take that criticism to someone who runs a big polling company, Scott Rasmussen. So polls get trashed all the time.
Of course they get trashed all the time.
So you must be wrong.
Well, they usually get trashed by the team that's losing. They don't like the results, so they say, oh, you can't trust the polls, or we got some secret information somewhere. The truth is, we're shocked when a poll really gets it wrong. In 2008, the entire industry missed Hillary Clinton's win in the New Hampshire primary, and the reason people were shocked is because they've come to expect those things don't happen.
And I must say, I was looking for poll mistakes to hit you with, and there weren't many. You've already named the one that I was about to
well, there was,
to.
There was 1948, but I wasn't around then when Dewey beat Truman.
I assume you've improved since then. So how do you sample?
The theory is you just call 1,000 phone numbers at random and it all works out.
Is that what you do?
No, because first of all, you have to make sure you place a lot more calls into a place like California than Wyoming because there's a whole lot more Californians. We also know that women answer the phone more than men, and older people more than younger people, and whites more than non-whites. So you have to call into areas to make sure you try and get a pretty representative sample. And even when you do all that, you have to do what we call weighting the sample to make sure you have the right mix of men and women, young and old.
So how do you weight a sample?
Well, that's all those old statistics courses that a lot of people hated. But basically the concept is if we know that we're supposed to have 52% of women live in a particular state, we want to make sure that our sample matches out to 52% women.
All right, criticism. I'm told you favor Republicans. Time magazine says you're conservative-leaning, and the New York Times 538 blog says Rasmussen polls were biased.
There's always criticism of polls, and the pollster's incentive is always to get it right. I mean, we have nothing to gain by gaming a system.
But if you have a reputation for getting it right, you make more money. People trust you.
That's right. If you have a reputation for getting it right, you get more people mad at you, too.
Going on to his criticisms, you speak with the first person who answers the phone rather than a random selection.
There's an old academic theory about how to do a poll, which back in, the 1960s and 70s, when Gallup and just a few other pollsters, there weren't anywhere near as many pollsters as there are today, they would say, I'd like to speak to the oldest male or the youngest female. They would rotate within a household, and it was a very good technique. Everything has changed since the 1970s and the 80s. You may have heard we have Twitter, we have cable news, we have, a few other things.
So what's it have to do with polling?
It has everything to do with polling. People don't communicate the way they used to. One of the big issues in polling today has to do with cell phones. It's not just a question of...
He says you don't call cell phones.
Actually, we don't. We reach people who have abandoned landlines through an online approach. I mean, I have 2 sons. They don't even know you can talk on a cell phone. They think it's for tweeting and texting. We need to find new ways to reach people where they are communicating. 5 years from now, there will be no more phone polling.
So how do you get the information? I mean, you say the internet, but that's a very select group that might respond or not respond. I don't respond to these people asking me for surveys.
The answer is we don't know. The answer is we're back the way things were in the 1930s when you're trying to experiment with different theories. Our firm this year is going to be doing some polls. We're not going to release these. These are our internal experiments using entirely different techniques so we can measure them up against the election results and see how well we do.
He also says in the 2000 Bush win, you were off, way off. Pro-Republican, 5% higher than it was.
We did. We missed in the Bush year. We showed the president winning or the then Governor Bush winning by more than he did. We also then went back, and this is the way a pollster works. You compare what you actually found to the actual results, and you learn from it. So by 2004, we were within a 0.5 percentage point of both Bush and Kerry's total. We did miss with Obama. We predicted he would win 52 to 46. He ended up winning 53 to 46.
That's pretty small. And on his behalf, I have to say, I was looking for stuff to confront him with, and those were the only examples I could find.
And look, we make mistakes. Every pollster makes mistakes. It is part of the process. Even in polling theory says one result out of every 20 will be off by more than the margin of error. So that it is part of the process, and that's why you want to look at a variety of polls and look for the common ground.
Or even better, given that pollsters can make mistakes, I would say the heck with all you guys and look at the people who bet and the wisdom of crowds. And where people bet on these things, like intrade.com,
Well,
I'm here, that's the most accurate thing, better than pollsters.
hey, listen, I trust the wisdom of crowds. I would trust the American people more than their politicians any day of the week. Intrade, though, is driven a lot by conventional wisdom and by polling data. It's a fairly thinly traded market.
So not so much for the presidency.
Not as much, but still relatively thin. Intrade at the end is very, very good. I don't mean to disparage it, but it is not a replacement for polls.
Well, we'll find out in the next few years.
We sure will.
Let's move on to one last myth. I assume, most people assume, that the vice president and the president are going to be from the same party. Yeah, but that may be a myth.
Well, if this year's election ends up in the Electoral College a 269 to 269 tie, it's a long shot, maybe 200 to 1 against. But if that happens, the House picks the president, which would more than likely be Mitt Romney, and the Senate picks the vice president, which would be Joe Biden.
And it's unlikely, but possible. I was surprised looking at the totals how close they've been. Rutherford Hayes won by 1 electoral vote in 1876. More recently, Bush Gore, 5 electoral votes. So this could happen this time.
It could. I think we're headed to a close election. We're headed to a close fight in the Electoral College. And you've got to remember, we have a fragile system. The government today really is struggling to earn the legitimacy of the American people. And the way the election process is playing out is not helping that at all.
Thank you, Scott Rasmussen. Coming up,